won the North London derby, beat Bayern Munich, and drew against Chelsea. Had I had offered many an Arsenal fan that before any of the games took place, they probably would have taken it. But I can't lie, isolated to the Chelsea game, I would have taken a draw. I'm not ecstatic over a draw, but I do feel a bit shortchanged if I'm honest with you. So let's go over the Chelsea and Arsenal kind of game and talk about the key talking points. Smash the like button, all of those things. Let's go. Things that I'm about to say are without claims. You know, we missed Saliba. We didn't have Gabriel Magalhaes. One of the men informing Trossard wasn't available, and there's been a lot of injuries. So I understand Mikel Arteta's reluctance to maybe put the handbrake down, maybe approach this game more conservatively, dependent on how or whatever contexts were thrown in before, during, and ultimately towards the dying embers of the game. But when I look around that 11, and based on what I saw, I definitely think there was enough potential to give a better performance and maybe kind of win. Again, anyone's going to miss Saliba. Anyone's going to miss Gabriel Magalhaes, who's effective at both ends from set pieces. He would have helped out from the defensive set piece we conceded against Chelsea, even though against Sunderland, you know, he was there. But yeah, man, it was a shock to the system not having Saliba there. We know Gabriel Magalhaes wasn't going to be a part. We know there's ever so more minutes in the legs, people. I wouldn't quite describe it as a makeshift backline, but it wasn't our first choice backline that we saw. You know, again, halftime is one thing, but they've had a man sent off. We know we haven't put in the best of performances with 11 men, and we need to kind of show a bit more in the second half. And I'm sure the manager and the players know that. That being said, they started off red hot in the second half. We were cold, essentially, people. If I'm completely honest with you, look, we conceded a dumb foul. We conceded a dumb corner. Ultimately, that led to our demise when Chalobah obviously scored in the 48th minute, which was a lapse in concentration for a resolute side, people. We did limit Chelsea to just 2 shots on target. You could say that was a credible shift, people. But I do think more than anything, it's not actually the defenders stepping in. It's kind of the plan Bs and what we're going to do in terms of build-up play when you don't have Magalhaes and actually with Saliba, because even when we missed out on Zubamendi a couple of weeks ago, Saliba was central to the build-up play. Football's a simple game, as we know, people. You got to go from one end to the other. You got to keep balls out there back of your net. You got to score in front of the other, in the other's goal. We didn't do that to our standards, so we can't complain that we got a draw. The football purist in me has to give credit where due. Chelsea's man-to-man press disrupted Arsenal's rhythm early. It's a bit of a full circle moment because in the second half against Bayern Munich, when we went man-to-man, we actually provided Bayern with a lot of issues. But I think they forced a lot of turnovers. They stopped us getting the ball into midfield really and truly and bringing it into our more creative kind of players. I think that's why you probably saw Declan Rice picking up the ball a lot deeper. Mascara and Timber being a lot more adventurous. Raya trying his best Busquets or Pirlo impression. And I think that's where I needed my manager, Mikel Arteta, at halftime to tweak things. It's above my pay grade. I'm not Mikel Arteta or Maresca. I ain't managed, but that's just what I felt as an armchair expert, if I'm completely honest with you, man. They were forcing turnovers. Clearly, they were trying to make it a physical scrap, which, as I've said, I don't necessarily mind that. You saw the amount of yellow cards for both teams in the first half. There were some slight adjustments from Arteta. You know, he looked to kind of swap Noni and Saka for a moment, and he tweaked 1-2 things in the second half. But I think it lacked a lot of bite, if I'm honest. And credit to Maresca, because I think the use of Reece James in midfield, actually, when they're setting up passing lanes, Declan Rice was saving our bacon, because Reece James, Fufana in terms of build-up play, and Gusto, it was very interesting to see that, if I'm completely honest with you. Reece James had a dominating performance. As I've stated already, Maresca and Arteta, they got their own philosophies and their own kind of stuff as to why they do what they do from a tactical point of view. But they're from the same school of Pep Guardiola. And I'm sure after the game, they called each other, or in Chelsea Stadium, they had a glass of wine. The one evident and obvious difference between the obvious, as their two individual managers, is that for me, Maresca, I keep calling him Maresca is more likely to tinker. And I think he would have told Arteta, Adanya in midfield, purely because the use of Reece James, the use of Fufana, Gusto inverting, João Pedro occupying and floating on the shoulders of our centre halves, Fernandez in the pockets, they're creating several overloads. Let's have it right. Arteta will always favor stability and defensive solidity and his team shape. So he knew that, again, with Marino and whoever up front, we'd always go into our two banks of four or 4-4-2. We would always hold our shapes. And when we did engage the press, simply put, there'd be another option. If James obviously drops deeper to receive the ball off Chalobah or off Sanchez, one Arsenal player will have to engage and naturally they'll pass through them. That's why I think we was in a lot of problems in midfield, if I'm brutally honest. Whether it was Caicedo when he bloody stayed on the pitch offering a lane, as I said, Gusto inverting, their wingers staying high and wide, the Gustos, the Pedros, the Caicedos, more so the Enzo Fernandez is in pockets. From a neutral point of view, I think this game, Fulham and Sunderland will give Mikel Arteta a lot tactically to think about. And actually buying. Arsenal's left-hand side, in my opinion, didn't function as well as on the right-hand side. Naturally, we've got Timber and Saka over there, and it's a new look kind of left-hand side that hasn't had Trossard or the stability that we've been afforded, really and truly. As we were working on the left-hand side, I believe the connections with our players were too far, too wide, ultimately too far apart, and weren't providing anything in areas that's really going to disable Chelsea's shape, if I'm honest with you. The right-hand side was in place, the left-hand side wasn't. And that was whether Hincapié started to gamble, Calafiori started to gamble, or more so because of the dynamics and how the second half went with Miles Lewis-Skelly. When he was dropping into defensive and holding midfield positions against 10 men, he would be left to the two centre-backs with Zubamendi and Rice. So again, we're not getting the ball in any area that's really gonna harm people. Ultimately, we're left with a broken connection down the left-hand side. We're overly reliant on the right, which did provide the source of the goals, people. There was no through option. Chelsea have blocked that lane. There was no over option as Gusto was concentrating on Martinelli in isolation. We could simply put only go around them, people. And naturally, as the ball is switched, the open touch of the receiving player triggers, a rotation. And that is why another kind of thing for Mikel Arteta to have had to change games and change the game and be a bit more proactive for me. Obviously, any team that misses both centre halves in Saliba and Gabriel are going to struggle. And it's just the second time in 162 Premier League games that we've missed them. When you look at it, I do think we've got good options. We had no choice but to pivot towards Mosquera and Hincapié. Both of them, considering that this is a baptism of fire and anything but a dead rubber game, they stood firm, if I'm completely honest. I do think if you go and look at the corner we conceded, you'll actually see Enzo Fernandez blocking off Mosquera quite well. I would have to give it to them. Both of them, and technically Mosquera's of South American heritage, and I know he's Spanish, but both our South American savages at centre-half stood firm. They were resilient in adversity. Again, you look at how Mosquera played, they were always going to be up against it, people. As a duo, I think they adapted very well, especially when we had possession. Obviously, they couldn't fully shut down Chelsea, and set pieces we could have done better. But for their first league start together, they did well. I do think there was elements of shaky man marking, potentially moments of improvement with their build-up play. I do think we did well as a team to limit Chelsea to low XG chances. For Mosquera in particular, I think he showed immense courage on the ball when we never had any passing lanes. And in general, he did have a little mistake. People make mistakes. Footballers are human, which led to Stavio obviously having that half chance. Both teams didn't do enough in front of goal. In my opinion, I do think Mosquera edged it as the kind of steadier hand. I do think Hincapié's recovery moments shone twice as bright as his slips. He did have a slip which presented a glaring opportunity to João Pedro. Fortunately for us, it came to nothing. I do think it highlights what Gabriel Magalhaes and Saliba bring us in terms of thunder and lightning. Saliba's calmness, Gabriel's mentality. But in terms of deputies, they did well. We're going to need depth. And games like this and situations like this highlight that, simply put, during this December grind, you need depth. But as a duo, they need more reps and they're going to go and get that. And I mean, Arsenal fans, it's not that we can't be disappointed and it's not that we can take the lazy view, because I do think some people do the overly negative and the overly positive. It's a bump on the road against a very good team in Chelsea. When we have dropped points, we drop points against Sunderland, one of the most informed sides at the time. And I know they got worse somehow, but Liverpool, obviously, the reigning champions. Pep Guardiola's Manchester City, obviously. We're not Maresca, club World Cup champions and stuff. We're not losing to little men. That being said, once again, in all those games, I think we could have done better. But life, like football, is never straightforward. We're not going to win every game, keep a million clean sheets, score a million goals, and everything goes to plan. So, yeah, we need to kind of claw back those 2 points. We need to go back and build up some momentum, because it has taken a bit of a buffer. But we do need to remember the bigger picture, people. And the bigger picture is the title race buffer has been hit to a degree, but our race for that title is still intact. But the pressure does build, people. A draw here pre-game probably would have been accepted by both sides, people, especially with Chelsea being unbeaten in 5 and bullish around Barca. Not to say I'm happy, not to say we shouldn't have been winning, not to say we wasn't the slight favourites, people. And obviously, you look at City and Liverpool, especially City, they're probably thinking, you know what? 2 other title challenges have indirectly dropped points, people. Arsenal's destiny remains in their hands. December is a packed schedule. It demands relentlessness. We need to go on a run or risk rivals closing in. But this is what makes football. It's 2 points dropped, people, overall. And it does feel that, given the circumstances, especially when, simply put, they went down to 10 men. But everybody blowing their top and talking of crisis and things like that, they're doing too much. But I can't control that. As I always say, I don't tell you what to think, just think. Obviously, depending on how you view the game, yeah, let's be honest. Chelsea were on the front foot. They were purring, they were roaring. The crowd are obviously bullish as after beating Barcelona. The same goes for the players. I must admit, yeah, I like that, because in today's day and age, Maresca, Mikel Arteta, Pep Guardiola, every manager's kind of a masterful tactician, and these games turn into a chess match. And there was elements of that, obviously, in the derby, the London derby. But I like the fact that, there's a bit of, Chelsea are up for it. Arsenal are physically able to cope. There's tackles flying in. The referee, and Taylor, obviously, is very trigger happy with the yellow cards, really, especially for Arsenal. We had numerous within the first 13 minutes, if I'm completely honest with you. But that being said, though, at the point, and just in general, when Chelsea have had a man sent off, you've got to make that count. And that leads to my disappointment. I do think it was a great performance from Chelsea, because it didn't make a difference whether they had 10 or 11. Naturally, obviously, they started to park the bus ever so slightly, a bit more in the second half and counter attack. But it didn't look obvious that it was 10 against 11. So for me, it's a missed opportunity to capitalize on, simply put, a numerical edge. We couldn't break down Chelsea's deep block efficiently and effectively after the red card. We only created sporadic chances despite having 68% of possession. We did equalize through Bukayo Saka's cross in the 59th minute for double and Mikel Merino. But other than that, we really failed to convert or make any further openings. We had some half chances, literally half chances in either half. Saka, Martinelli, Timber, Gyökeres, but we didn't do enough in front of goal. Simple as that, if I'm honest with you. You could argue, that could have been a potential turning point in a gritty game. This echoes concerns from earlier draws, where sometimes our dominance doesn't always translate into goals, or any sustained periods of dominance or numerical advantages maybe don't. I must admit, people, to close this and offer my ending statements, I understand we've played a lot of games. I understand, if you can't win, don't lose. I understand if it's a draw, it's not the end of the world. I understand the fixture calendar list. I do think we wanted to win the game. But I must admit, I am a bit disappointed. I know there's several injuries. Trossard's in great form. He couldn't play. Gyökeres was fit enough to make the bench, as was Jesus. We're missing our first choice defensive back pairing, which indirectly ties into maybe our build-up play, getting it from Raya into our defenders, ultimately into midfield and progressing up the pitch. So I understand with these factors and factors I haven't mentioned, why there might have been a risk averse, a handbrake up, etc., etc. It's not the best of results. It's definitely not the worst in many ways, because of us being 5 points clear and what could have happened if we took all 3 points. I can understand the disappointment. I can also understand, we had to come back from behind. Ultimately, both teams, didn't do well enough in front of goal. Obviously, conceded goals. I'm sure both managers and sets of players want to do better. So a draw, I can't complain. I do find it funny how both teams have a point each, and one team is all happy as Larry and great and optimism, and the disappointment, etc. with one club. It's a third year in a row where we haven't done the business at Stamford Bridge. I do think it felt like the kind of issues or talking points we had around Arsenal, people, at the start of the season about the handbrake up. I never truly felt we went for it and gambled in the Chelsea game. I never felt that we truly looked like we was on it. 11 versus 11, let's be honest, Chelsea probably win that game. I did want to see us on the front foot a bit more after the second half, but we conceded a free kick in a corner very early doors, you know, and even the marking on the corner, you know, both teams are very good from set pieces. For the team that is the poster boy in Europe of defending in all aspects, that wasn't good enough. You know, we could have done the smash and grab, that weren't good enough, but then we're counting on one hand the amount of chances. I do think Mikel Arteta needed to change things in midfield because we weren't getting our players on the ball in key areas. That being said, individually, players could have stood out. I know Saka got an assist, and I don't think he was bad, but he was a bit too trigger happy in front of goal for me. I think Rice and Timber were great. I think Hincapié and Mascara can come out with their reputations enhanced. I actually think Mascara showed a lot of bravery on the ball when, you know, Chelsea were closing our passing lanes. Maresca's a masterful tactician, him and Mikel Arteta. The one difference with Mascara and Arteta, Maresca, apologies, is he's known to tinker things a bit more. They're both from the Mikel Arteta school of thought. The Pep Guardiola, apologies, school of thought. So it makes sense. And I must admit, the football purist in me, taking the Arsenal cap off for a second, I think that from a tactical point of view, I actually think, you know, that was the best I've seen someone play against us this season. And they're not alone. I felt the way Bayern set up against us, the way Chelsea set up against us, and I might throw people off with this and we won the game, but how Marco Silva's mid-block. So there's plenty of food for thought. And I do think, you know, in terms of improvements, there's plenty for us to learn with the Sunderland draw, with the Chelsea draw, with the Liverpool defeat, and with the Manchester City draw, on top of games we've actually won, people. So it could be good. It could be better, sorry. It could be a lot worse. We could have, you know, not got anything. We maybe could have got 3 points. Probably fortunate that Caicedo was a bit of an idiot and got himself sent off. All we can do is move forward to Brentford. If you can't win the battle, don't lose the war. If you can't win, don't lose. We got a point. We keep it pushing.